First, I would like to tell you that I have spoken with many ambassadors, as my husband was a diplomat for 13 years, but I have really never seen such a people-oriented, wonderful, lovely person as Elena. And this is not just my personal opinion, it's also the opinion of my brother, who became an instant friend of hers in Washington, D.C. when he first met her. And when I spoke with him, he said, introduce her as the very best Bulgarian representative in the U.S. first. Second, as a wonderful mother. Third, as a great wife. And fourth, as one of the best lecturers, because nobody fell asleep when I was there. So this is already a compliment. I have the privilege to introduce to you Her Excellency Elena Borislavova, Poptodorova, Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of the Republic of Bulgaria to the USA. She is a people person, a fighter for the human rights, an achiever of impossible dreams and goals for the country of Bulgaria. Born in Sofia, my favorite city, went to an English high school, my favorite high school, graduated from Kliment Ohridsky University of Sofia, my favorite university, in the Department of Humanities, English and Italian Language and Literature. Just my sort of person. Went to a postgraduate 2-year course in International Relations and Diplomacy. A great diplomat. From 1975, after graduation, to 1990, she was Ministry of Foreign Affairs, 3rd Secretary. That's how she started. And she finished as Minister, Plenipotentiary Minister in the Bulgarian Embassy in Rome and Consul General of Bulgaria to San Marino. So this career took her from 1987 to 1990. From 1990 to April 2001, she was a Member of Parliament, part of the Committee of Foreign Policy and European Integration, National Security Committee, Committee on Radio and Television, and Committee on Human Rights, which I was especially interested in since I worked for the Voice of America in Washington, D.C., and she was our favorite person. She spoke for the radio and television people. Then, since June of 2001 to about August 2001, she was Director of the Directorate of International Organizations in Human Rights at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. August 2001 to February 2002, again Director of in the Directorate of International Organizations in Human Rights, spokesperson of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And since the lucky date of February of 2002, we have had the privilege to have her as the Ambassador of Bulgaria to the United States. Some of her achievements: she's an honorary member of the Parliamentarian Assembly of the Council of Europe in recognition of services rendered to the European cause in January of 2002. And I want you to know that she is the only Bulgarian holder of this title. So you can touch her for good luck after she finishes. Some of the committees and organizations she has been involved in: Vice Chairman of the Bulgarian delegation to the Interparliamentary Union, member of the Coordinating Committee of Women Parliamentarians of IPU responsible for Eastern and Central Europe, member of the Bulgarian delegation of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, PACE Social Health and Family Affairs Committee, Committee on Relations with Non-Member Countries, member of the Joint Parliamentary Committee, Bulgaria, European Union, Rapporteur for Visa Issues and Social Policies. Reconfirmed member of the Bulgarian delegation to the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, Vice Chairman of the Committee on Equal Opportunities of Women and Men. Member of the Social Health and Family Affairs Committee of the Committee of the Honoring of Obligations and Commitments by C Member States Monitoring Committee and of Culture and Education Committee. Member of the International Forum of Parliamentarians, Deputy Chairperson of the Inter-European Parliamentary Forum on Population and Development in Brussels. Deputy Chairperson of the National Commission for UNESCO of the Republic of Bulgaria. And also one great thank you from the bottom of my heart to her for what she has done for Bulgaria to be accepted and be part soon 100% member of NATO. Thank you.
Good afternoon to all of you who decided to spend your lunchtime break with me, and I'm so grateful to you for that. It's always a challenge to speak after presentations of the one we've just heard. It's embarrassing because one is never certain whether one lives up to the presentation. There's one thing, though, which I would like to subscribe to and confirm in a very sort of honest and personal way. Yes, indeed, I would like to see my country be recognized and respected as part of the democratic family in this world. And within my own modest resources and possibilities, I'm trying to do this. I have been trying to do this for the last 13 years. And I believe this talk with you is part of this effort. Because, there hasn't been much change from what I was doing for 11 years in Parliament, meeting my constituencies, and what I'm doing here. I'm meeting here constituencies as well. American people, American audiences, to whom I'd like to render at least a modest, a limited idea of what my country now stands for and wants to achieve in life. Maybe I should first, but I look at, I glance at the clock and I think that I would probably make a few main messages and then leave time for you to ask your questions. Always the questions are more interesting than the presentations. So, just very briefly, I found out that since not too much is known about my country here, and very logically, very reasonably so, I usually start by saying where my country is. I recognize that we have here a very good group of Bulgarian students. However, whether they were so detailed in their talks with their mates here. Bulgaria is an old European state, exactly 1,322 years old. And this long history, of course, has brought about ups and downs and all sorts of vicissitudes in our historical fate. We are situated in the southeastern part of Europe, which is bordering the Black Sea on the east, Romania up north, Yugoslavia, Macedonia on the west, and Greece and Turkey down south, which puts us in a very complicated region, believe me. It has been an area for unresolved ethnic, religious, border issues for not just decades, but for ages. And of course you have heard of a series of Yugoslav wars in the 90s. That was, I hope, a last series, a last phase of settling down this region. Bulgaria spent 500 years of these 1300 under foreign domination, and that was the Turkish foreign domination from the 14th to the 19th century, which, as you see, leaves us with a very short, historically relatively short period of independent development. And again, that was a period in the 20th century which made us face 2 world wars, 50 years or almost 50 years of communist regime as a result of the division of Europe immediately after the Second World War. And finally, here we are, as of 1990, striving hard to get where we believe we belong, to Europe united, whole and free. Very briefly about the events in my country. Now, what Bulgaria right now is, it's a parliamentary republic with a multi-system, democratically elected governments through parliament, We have a president who also undergoes direct election. Parliament is elected on a party ticket, unlike here, which, if you ask me, makes our representatives in Parliament, our parliamentarians, a bit less accountable than senators and congressmen here, since it's always the party that comes first. That was the easier part of the reform, of the changes. The second part was the economic reform. Or if I'm to give a geometric description of how this enormous change took place, it's like concentric circles. The largest, the easier one was the political change. Second, probably one to go through. In terms of economic integration, Bulgaria holds negotiations for membership in the EU. We hope to become members in 2007 and complete these talks by the end of this year. Complicated negotiations because we are discussing quotas of exports, numbers of jobs. It's about the way in which Bulgaria's economy will function after accession, and there will be a price to pay for that, since we will have to cut on prices in terms of salaries and wages. We will have to, on the contrary, increase other prices such as electricity, energy. In other words, we are adapting our system to a true market economy. Last year, in its annual report, the European Commission, for the first time, described Bulgaria as a functioning market economy. But we did go through a very, very difficult period because not as easy as the political change. Privatization was a challenge which took time and effort. It was not always done properly. We had a time when there was reluctance to go ahead with privatization, which brought about a very high inflation rate in the country, dramatic drop of wages, that was in the mid-90s, hence early elections and change of government. But as of 1997, I'm happy to say that there is a smooth process of privatization, of integration into European economic structures and into NATO. For the first time after 97, we succeeded in the last election to secure continuity in foreign policy and security policy in the first place, and also in the basics of the economic reform in the country. So right now, we are facing, hopefully, and I would really hope for 100%, as Julia said, chance of NATO membership. Where we stand on this one. In November in Prague, Bulgaria was invited to become a NATO member alongside other 6 East European democracies, or new democracies as we are often referred to. Now we are undergoing the negotiations for the signing of accession protocols, which will be signed on the 20th March in Brussels, and our team has just come back after a very successful round of negotiations. And then these protocols of accession go to the national parliaments of the NATO member states for ratification. Needless to say, ratification in the US Senate is the crucial one. So this will happen, will begin actually, not happen, but the process will begin sometime in April, probably after the recess. And we will be the object of a very serious scrutiny. We as a country, as a system, in all possible ways, you name it, they'll ask it. Not just military reform, which is the obvious one, but also rule of law, protection of classified information, safeguards against illicit trade in arms and items of dual use, judiciary, accountable, transparent and efficient judiciary, transparency of privatization, human rights, trafficking. It's all a package of requirements which we are working hard to face and to be able to respond to. All these endeavors of Bulgaria take place in a very complicated international setup. I call it complicated because of the most recent developments in the transatlantic relationship. And having said this, I would immediately like you to know that back in 1990, when we were first heading for reform and for change, We all knew we were going to the West. We were going westward. And to us, the West was the United States of America, Europe. This was one set of values, one set of criteria, one and the same lifestyle in the general of the word. And we wouldn't like to see a split in this transatlantic relationship. It is my hope, even more than hope, I do have reasons to believe that this crisis which we witness now in this relationship on both sides of the Atlantic will be overcome. It has been a relationship that lasted for decades, and it will be a real waste for international relations, for the international challenges of peace and security to have it fall apart because of a serious test. Indeed, I agree that we are all faced with a serious test with regard to Iraq. So we will see. We have on Friday the final report of the inspectors, and then obviously decisions will be made in the following week. Having mentioned this, I would like you to know one more thing about my country. On the very day of 9/11, the Bulgarian Parliament voted unanimously to approve the membership of Bulgaria in the anti-terrorist coalition. The whole world knows what 9/11 did to the Americans, but very few people know what it did to us Bulgarians, and more specifically to the Bulgarian political life. Until this date, there was always one party, the Socialist Party, which was very reluctant to NATO membership. And usually it was all the rest and this party which was of neutrality. On this date, we had a unanimous vote of the Bulgarian Parliament on both issues: accession to NATO and joining the anti-terrorist coalition. You may not be able to grasp the importance of this consensus, but to Bulgaria this means a lot. This means that it is politically already, without questioning it from any part, from any side, a prospective partner in the North Atlantic Alliance. Ever since that day, and this was part of the parliamentary decision, Bulgaria behaved as a de facto member of the anti-terrorist coalition, of NATO, and as an ally of the U.S. This is the reason why it was an easy decision last week when our government decided to grant the requests which were forwarded by the U.S. government for supporting an eventual operation in Iraq, which amounts to granting a military base at the Black Sea coast. It's an airfield that was already used once during the Kosovo conflict. And again, it was granted to the U.S. forces. Overflight rights, plus a unit of 150 soldiers, probably 2 platoons of anti-chemical and anti-bacteriological protection, who are to be dislocated in either Jordan or Kuwait or Saudi Arabia. Bulgaria has been for a year now a non-permanent member of the Security Council, which was a very important position. We lobbied very hard to get it. Of course, at that time we didn't suspect what an important period it will come out to be for the whole world, and with us being part of decision-making on a global level. And I can tell you that all throughout this year of active involvement in the work of the Security Council, Bulgaria has been very cooperative, helpful, and a good ally in all resolutions that were voted of the U.S. delegation, and until this very last moment also of all NATO countries represented there. We have one more year to go, and we realize that this year, 2003, will be as challenging, as important as the previous one. I'm happy to be receiving calls of appreciation from both the National Security Council and the State Department for the way in which Bulgaria behaved over the last 2 years, ever since 9/11. And there is one thing which I would like to share with you. It came to me only last week when our foreign minister was in Washington and in New York, of course. But in Washington, he had important meetings in the NSC. And what was said there was the image, the perception of Bulgaria has changed. Nobody bothers anymore with Bulgaria's past. Bulgaria is an ally for the future. And we think about Bulgaria in strategic terms. You would imagine what importance such a statement has for us as government representatives, but also for the whole nation. A few words about the economy, and then I will really open the floor for questions and answers. I told you that we've been through a very difficult period until mid-90s, and that after 97, more or less coherent strategy of economic reform was started. Right now, the macroeconomic framework of the country is fairly good. We have 3.5% inflation, which is within a very healthy limit. We have a growth of 4.5, hopefully to be 5% this year. The agreements with the IMF continue on a regular basis, and you would imagine, since you are in international relations and international economic affairs, I believe, that the IMF is the criterion for a well-disciplined national economy. Otherwise, they wouldn't simply grant you with an agreement. What we still need to improve on is the micro level of the economy. Wages are still low, unemployment is high. It went down by 1% in the last year, but it was from 17 to 16, which is still a very high percentage. Of course, there is always the grey job market, so it's, I mean, just a figure wouldn't tell you all about it. People can survive some way or other. They find themselves some work to do, but this is not the good structure of a prospering economy. So we have to still fight, as I say, unemployment and very modest wages back home. However, the country is on track. There is complete awareness of the weak points, of the weak elements in national decision making. And I believe, I hope that within a few more years to go, we will also be able to report on better results on the living, of private living of the people. I will end up here, and I suggest that you ask about everything you have in mind. I've always sustained that there are no embarrassing questions. There may be embarrassing answers, but that's my responsibility, that's my problem. Thank you.
I was just wondering, you mentioned that the country is on track. What specific things is the country doing to improve, namely the low wages and the high unemployment?
We heavily depend on that, on the restructuring of the economy. And this is mostly done through privatization and attracting international foreign investors in the country. We are now focused on the big infrastructural projects in areas such as energy, roads, airports, and some basic industries such as the tobacco industry, the telecom. At the same time, restructuring is going on a lower level, so to say, not macro infrastructural level, with enterprises that have already been privatized. So that's more or less the approach we're taking. We're trying also to improve our exports, and which automatically brings about more production back home. Having said this, I'd like to mention to you that what we export right now is, and I'll start with what I forgot earlier, energy. Bulgaria actually exports almost half of its energy output to the neighboring countries. 48% of Turkey's energy by export. So that's one major item of export. Agricultural products, and that includes wines, processed fruits and vegetables, textile, pharmaceuticals, fertilizer. I mentioned pharmaceuticals. I think we have a good pharmaceutical industry. Machine parts and machine building. With relatively clean soil and air in farming. Again, it's a matter but of revenue. And one more, tourist inflow, a great deal over the last 3 or 4 years. It was also, to a certain extent, to a shift of interest, of tourist interest from some resorts. So that's a very, very important part of as well. Yes, please.
What is the relationship between Bulgaria and its bordering countries? How is that?
The short answer is excellent. A bit longer answer. When I mentioned these wars, a doorstep. To a among our minorities in the country. We have 8% Muslim population, which is an indigenous population. It's not like in Germany or France, where this is a new part of the population there. And given all the tensions around, still we had nothing like that in the country, which made it possible for us to have a good, a very important, because Macedonia is a key to the stability in the region. So we were very careful, very cautious to maintain good relationship with that country. With Greece and Turkey, the relations are excellent, and this gives me another motive to tell you about a format which was set up some time ago, a year ago. Romania and Bulgaria membership into NATO. The 4 foreign ministers or chiefs of staff meet on a regular basis to promote the 2 countries of mention of the alliance, as we are called, into full membership. With Turkey, the relations are very good in spite of different periods of history. With Greece, they sort of problems with the black. But there were times when we would quietly joke, well, we have at least one neighbor with ages-long relationship, and that's important to view these things with humor. Bulgarians are a tolerant nation. This may also be due to these facts of our history. I mentioned them very briefly, although no matter how big small, any critical situations. And I would like to take this opportunity now to tell you a story which you may not know, and that goes back to the years of World War II. You know about the years
started to reoccur in other countries. Never happened. Part of our philosophy. Survive in many critical situations, and we know how tragic it is to persecute people. Yes, please.
Yes. I've been told that there's a nuclear power plant on the Danube called in Kozloduy. That there's plans to close this nuclear power plant. How will that affect the exportation of energy?
I secretly hoped this question wouldn't come up. Because the best part of the energy we export comes exactly from Kozloduy. The situation is as follows. This reactor, or there are more reactors, there are actually 8 reactors there. They were built in older times. The first reactors were even closed at the end of last year, according to international agreements, because they were the old Soviet-style Chernobyl type. Now, negotiations have been going on for reactors 3 and 4. The Union that we closed them by the end of 2006. There was a big debate back home for that same reason. That's an important part of Bulgaria's economy. That has to do with exports, mostly of exports. There were groups in Bulgaria, so-called tried to prove that prices of energy negotiations, but calculation that we're that's another power station, nuclear, which was it has undergone all its feasibility studies. I mean, it's on the verge of starting construction. So that would be a substitute for these 2 reactors, which we will close when we enter the European Union. This is a condition, to put it in simple terms, and we have to comply with it. Yes.
Yes, you talked about the integration of Bulgaria into NATO, and I was just wondering how much Bulgaria has received in aid in that session. There's a lot of integration of equipment and procedures and so forth. Have you received much in U.S. aid or other foreign aid for that? And then my other question was, does Bulgaria aspire to join the European Union?
I will start with the second question. Including negotiations, hopefully this year, we have more chapters to close. And we hope, and we got a written sort of encouragement, written assurances from the European Commission at the end of last year that we will join in 2007. So that's on the EU side. On the NATO side, yes, we have had assistance, because this was an extremely complicated reform of, first of all, in the military area of the army. Bulgaria had a 120,000 strong army, which was commensurate with the population. As a matter of fact, we had more soldiers per capita in nominal terms than either Turkey or Greece, which was not too well known in making the calculations, doing the arithmetics. And it was a sort of a heavy, inefficient army, just maintenance. They already couldn't do any drilling, any no question about the need of downsizing the army. So for the last 2 years, we downsized by half, a bit more. Right now we have 58 out of the original 120,000. I can tell you that this was a very painful process, and I think men here would realize, I don't know if there are military men here, but when I talked even to General Ralston, he was telling me, look, I know that it's painful for a soldier, for a commander to just be made leave the army, because they were But that's inevitable. Again, it's one more of the prices we had to pay. And we did it. And I must say a good word about people. Exactly like good soldiers of their country, they implemented all needed requirements they were required. And what I'm also very proud to hear here, and that the other day, again, in a meeting with Ian Brzezinski, the Assistant Deputy Secretary for Defense, he was again very complimentary about the way in which the reform goes, and particularly about the chief of staff and the sort of military aspect, military dimension of the reform. We got assistance in those rehabilitation programs. What do you do with all these thousands of people whom you just send out in the streets? And there have been such programs. Of course, they cannot be 100% successful. It's very difficult to have someone who has spent all his life in the army, whatever else, a civilian profession. But I think these people were accommodated, and as I say, since they had this sense of duty, that helped. Now, then interoperability, another extremely difficult issue. We are far from that. I think that even the European allies are not fully interoperable. But we started work there, and there we get assistance, particularly about language training, some systems, communication systems, which we are introducing now in the Army. Another thing which we are greatly assisted in is the restructuring of the pyramid. It was totally reverted. We had more NCOs, on the other way around. We had more high-ranking officers rather than NCOs. Now this reversal of the pyramid is being done. Again, we need some expertise on that, so that's being granted. Cooperation between the intelligence services, military intelligence services of the two countries. And as I say, money for some projects, mostly to do with the accommodation of officers and military that had to leave the army. We increased our military spending, not only because it's a requirement from Brussels, but also because it's needed at this period. So we now have almost 3%, which is a very rare share paid by countries for military spending. And moreover, the government made a commitment to keep the same level of spending for this year. We'll see what happens next. Whoever.
Yes, ma'am. You mentioned earlier that the privatization of the Bulgarian economy was fairly this transition from the state-centered economy to the privatization of that.
I told you I trusted very much, trusted you for the questions. That's a very good question, which I saved for the Q&A period. In 1990, there was this illusion that transition is an overnight exercise, that it will just happen because we want it. There was one more illusion that we can do it also the Spanish way. And there were all these books which we read in 1990, 1991 about how the Spaniards did it from transition rather from their military to the civilian regime. There was one basic difference, which we realized only later, and that was property, the property issue. In Bulgaria, having belonged to the system of state-controlled ownership, property, industrial, any, it was very much more difficult to do the transition. Number one, because the assets had to be assessed and divided, the techniques of privatization. But before that, this was the philosophy, the concept of privatization. So it took us a long time. It took us almost 5 years before we actually proceeded, more than 5, 6 years, before we proceeded to real, feasible cash privatization. There was an attempt to do it halfway, the so-called mass privatization, which was a rather funny way of sort of having almost all workers own an enterprise or a company. And again, you never know who makes the decision and where the responsibility goes. I remember in earlier times, in communist times, there was, in the 80s, obviously at that time the Communist Party realized that property and title rights are something very important and a part of society and of human nature. So they said, well, we shall now introduce collective ownership of the industry by... You can imagine how that looks like. Nothing. So there was this also attempt to go through this, which was not shareholding the way you have it here. We paid the price also for that wrong approach to privatization. So now things are, as I say, on track. In all honesty, I have to say that we couldn't avoid corruption or misdoings in the whole privatization effort. There was partisan approach to privatization. There was nepotist approach to privatization. The good thing now, the good news is that the legislation was improved. In previous times, before 2001, there was a text in our privatization law which said that the privatization agency, which is a state body, can negotiate with a potential buyer. I like this young gentleman extremely. I can pick him up and say, you are my potential buyer. So that was the unhealthy approach. Those 3 or 5 people who made up the privatization agency could decide on who the potential buyer is, which is no competition at all. And there was one more tricky text which provided for managerial buyout of state-owned enterprises, which again means that the state or the government, whichever it is, easily dismiss an executive body, a managerial body, place its own people there, of competence or whatever, devalue the enterprise, and then have this managerial buyout take place. So I've had this first-hand experience in my own constituency, and unfortunately quite a few enterprises were simply ruined because of this approach, which was, as I say, a short-sighted approach. Not that people didn't understand the importance of privatization, the parochial way, the sort of not the objective way. Now all this is eliminated, and the most important thing is that the bidders, international investors, foreign investors as well, or foreign bidders, have fair recourse to justice. We've already had several cases brought to trial, brought to the court. If the procedure is not perfect from the point of view of practical implementation, but the concept is there and the awareness is there that if we want to get FDI in the country, the first thing a foreign investor would ask about is whether he can have this recourse to justice. So that's what we already have. So as I say, having paid the price of either illusions or kind of misunderstood shrewdness, to put it mildly, about privatization, eventually we understood that we cannot outfox the fox, and we better do it according to the rules. And that's what we hope to do, hopefully. Most of the have been private in the country. I'll immediately give you in the States. So this is American standard. This is the success story in Bulgaria. It built another plant there. From the production there, they cover practically the whole of Europe. They even, the Bulgarian finance director of the enterprise in Bulgaria, to serve here as a vice president of the entire company for financial matters. So that was a good one. Then we also have interest on the part of American companies in the field of energy, because we will be also privatizing our energy units, energy distributing units. Some other interest in wine industry, in several wine producing companies were already bought by Americans, and we are trying to stimulate interest. Yes, please.
What is the status of this agreement in Bulgaria at the moment?
Very important question. There is no problem at all for registering any religion, creed or denomination, nor any problem for free practicing this religion. We have a problem but it has nothing to do with other religions. The problem is with our own Bulgarian Orthodox Church. After 1990, there was a split, a serious split within the Orthodox Church, which I'm afraid harmed its mission a great deal. They seem to be now on the way of overcoming the split, but I mentioned this exactly to illustrate that it's not always the freedom of religion that can be a problem. Sometimes problems can emerge within a religion, inside. We have the majority of the population is East Orthodox. Traditionally, we have, as I said, 8% Muslims. We have about 1.5 Catholics, and the other creeds would be smaller in numbers. It's an interesting issue with our Roma population, because we also have 4.5 to 5% Roma. They would identify themselves differently in census, depending on where they feel they would be sort of more. Them identify themselves as Christians, others as Muslims, but there is no problem at all. There was in the early 90s, particularly with registration. Now it's all sort of remedied.
What is being done about racism against the Gypsies, and are they being represented in your government?
There have been cases of violence against Gypsies. There was a discussion in the Helsinki Commission in the U.S. Congress, and I volunteered to testify, and I was kindly invited to speak on the issue, and that was one of the issues that were taken up, violence and brutality. That's the main problem. It has happened. We have had several incidents. Part of them are so to say, private, that it would happen in the street, and that would be kind of a street quarrel or something. But what is most importantly dealt with was police violence, because there were also instances of police brutality and police violence versus Roma. What happened was that, first of all, we have a stronger text in the law for punishing any such incidents, and secondly, we had an investigation done exactly because of these cases within the Ministry of the Interior, and there were several people there, sergeants, who were released as a result. There are MPs in Parliament who are Roma. You would permit also kind of a humorous approach to it. I remember that in the previous legislature, every political party was very careful to have a Roma on its list, and to have a Roma sitting in Parliament. But I'm saying this with a sense also of bitter irony, because this is not the way to resolve the situation of the Roma. Just to put someone there in the seat and say, yes, we take care of them. The problem is that they're not organized themselves. They do not have one organization or two, I mean, at least countable organizations. They're more on a, I won't describe it, I save this because we're being broadcast, but they're in groups. And a group would have a leader, and then there is always competition among the groups. So it's very hard to organize, ways to be able to move further into Parliament as an independent party, and then into government. They're also represented, I'll tell you where, they're represented in a special council on ethnic relations in the Council of Ministers, which is the government body on minority issues, and they have their representative there. But I can tell you, I would very much like them to sort of become more aware of themselves and of their needs, and to really have an organization that can part of the dialogue, the political and public dialogue in the country. It's a problem, I can tell you, social, economic problem, but that's not much different from other countries. I think it might, funnily enough, maybe it's just the states that have not had these massive agglomerations of Roma population. Or you have, maybe I'm wrong. I don't think so. I haven't. But in Europe, this is a serious issue, and this is why we constantly account for that before, as I say, the Helsinki Commission, Council of Europe, and there is a an awareness that it's a problem that needs to be dealt with.
We've heard a great deal about organized crime in Eastern European countries, and I know, for example, groups like the Black Hand still exist in Eastern Europe and Bulgaria and things like that. What has the Bulgarian government done to try and curb corruption and organized crime, and what will it continue to do?
This is a new name to me, Black Hand? Okay, yeah. Look, yes, there is organized crime in the region, and it has to do with mostly with drug trafficking and trafficking of women. What we did was, first of all, strengthen border controls. We have immensely hardened and made more rigid requirements for coming into the country, and particularly from certain countries. The other thing we did was a very serious reform in the customs. We even signed a contract with the British customs organization, Crown's agents, and they came into the country, into the customs service itself, and immediately, or within a few months only, the effect was felt. Unfortunately, there was corruption, a great deal of corruption at the border, at the customs points. So that was visibly sort of contained, not eliminated. I don't believe there is a country in this world that can say that they're completely corruption-free, but that was greatly limited. Is that the police broke down several channels of trafficking. There is one more item of trafficking, which is cars. No matter how strange it may seem, but there's demand in the area. So one more area of organized crime. They have been successful, as I say, in cutting down several of these channels. The big success, though, was in intercepting drugs through the borders. And I believe that our police and our customs have been the most successful ones in the whole area in intercepting quantities, and especially of heroin. So that's a good development, and the important thing is to go further. But having said this, organized crime is not a national phenomenon. It is exactly by its nature, it's international. So we badly need cooperation from the neighboring countries, and this is what we try to do, where there is a working relationship among our services. Bulgaria is part of Interpol, of all European structures that fight organized crime. But there needs to be international intolerance, zero tolerance to that. Yes, please.
Due to the transitions that Bulgaria is in right now, a lot of young people are leaving the country and trying to find their way somewhere else rather than Bulgaria. Is there something that it is done or will be done for the young people to be brought back and to be attracted back to their own country?
Yeah, sad question, but even more sad answer. This is what I've witnessed in the past 10 or more years. There is really an exodus of Bulgarians, and especially of young people from the country. What needs to be done is create conditions. And I tell you, it's not doing something special for the young people or special for the young specialists who are middle age, this and that. It's important to improve the general situation in the country. So if all these measures that are in the pipeline now, that would mean that you will have good reasons to come back, and I really want to see this happen, and I would hope to see you next time back in Bulgaria. I would just like to add one word of gratitude to the Brigham Young University and to Pete in particular for making it possible for me to be here with you. It was really a thrilling and unique opportunity, and I was very much looking forward to it. So thank you, Brigham Young University.